the Tower of London, a monument to the corruption of the soul, where in the shadowed past a man gained the throne of England despite the insane ambition that drove him to evil and murder.
No! Richard! For the love of God!
Don't blame me, Clarence. Blame Edward's choice.
The Tower of London was my brother Gene's project, and I will always feel grateful to Gene because he hired me as the director. He was, I'm convinced, the most efficient producer I've ever seen, so my hands were free to direct as I pleased.
The king is dead, and you would be king.
Clarence!
But Gene is in a position to tell you more.
Well, with Roger, we weren't exactly strangers. In particular, Tower of London, since it was something that I did create, and I did have, a wealth of understanding early on because Roger was making other films prior to Tower of London, so it was a natural wedding of my abilities and his abilities. My brother and I came to California in 1941 from Detroit. Both of us went to Stanford. At no point in time did we ever imagine being in the film business. As a matter of fact, my indoctrination to the film business was at Stanford when I read a series of short stories in the New Yorker magazine about a very colorful talent agent whose life revolved around playing tennis at the Beverly Hills Tennis Club. Well, I played tennis and I was on the Stanford tennis team. So I thought, wait a minute, this is certainly better than insurance or selling automobiles. So this is what I thought I would like to do. I was an agent at MCA. Roger graduated Stanford, and he originally was going to be an engineer. Certainly after the first 4 or 5 months, that was not for Roger. So he gravitated also into the film business, and he was a reader at 20th Century Fox. And at one point in time, I was an agent representing Bill Bowers, who was an important writer, and he wrote The Gunfighter. And I gave the script to Fox. Roger was the reader. It got a great report, and it became one of the most important films of that year. Prior to Tower of London, I'd made an inexpensive film for United Artists called The Cat Burglar. As a matter of fact, it was written by Leo Gordon, who wrote Tower of London for me. And Leo actually wrote the first script I'd ever made with Roger. Eddie Small saw The Cat Burglar and liked it. So he called me in for a meeting, and he said, look, I like this film. It's a very small film. You did a very good job. Everybody at United Artists likes the film. If there's something you feel that is more scale, come to me, and I think we might be able to do something together. So obviously I left the office very happy about this kind of a meeting because, this doesn't happen all the time. It's usually you knocking on somebody's door. It was the reverse in this case. So I then talked to Leo, and we talked at great length about what we should do to be sure that we had this deal locked up with Eddie Small and United Artists, because Eddie Small had a very important independent production company, much like the Mirishes. So he was a man of real significance at this point. We brainstormed many ideas, and then we came up with Richard III and Shakespeare. And part of that mix was the fact that Laurence Olivier had had a success and an Academy Award doing Hamlet. So we thought, wait a minute, Shakespeare's box office, Poe's box office, this is a perfect venue for Eddie Small. At this point in time, Roger was enjoying enormous success with his very stylish Edgar Allan Poe, Vincent Price films. So it was very obvious that Vincent should play Richard III, and Roger was, of course, our director of choice from the very beginning. So that's the genesis of Tower of London and how it came about and how it eventually was made.
It is the night of April 9th in the year 1483. The night that Edward IV, King of England, will die.
Then, about 2 days prior to the camera roll, Eddie calls us to his office and says, fellas, we're going to make the picture in black and white. Well, Roger and I looked at each other, and he said, you know, all the other pictures that Vincent and Roger that you've made are in color. He said, we can do this one in black and white, and think of the money that's going to be saved on the prints. Well, I said, wait a minute, Eddie, but the style of Roger's films are the lushness, almost the Baroque look of these films. This is what sells this picture. He said, Gene, I know how to sell this film. United Artists agrees with me. They want it in black and white. Once again, Roger and I leave the office, faced with the dilemma, do we leave the film, do we make the film? But this time it's not 3 or 4 weeks earlier than, than the camera rolled. The camera's rolling, I think this was on a Thursday, the camera's rolling on a Monday. So we went forward in black and white.
You accuse my name? You accuse your queen?
I accuse only this dagger and the hand that wielded it, Your Majesty. This will be a bitter moment for Edward to take to his grave.
It was always meant to be period language, authentic language, and once again, the template was Hamlet.
Edward.
You murdered your brother. You murdered your wife. And the innocent woman, Mistress Shaw.
You don't understand, Edward. I must be king. I will be king. Nothing on this earth can stop me.
Also, Vincent had done Shakespeare, so he felt very comfortable about doing that, and he was quite good in it.
Is it what men do that darkens the sky? Or do the skies blacken the souls of men?
We could have used 3 people or 4 people to produce and direct these films because we didn't have that amount of money or that amount of pre-production. So we all really knew where we were going even before we started pre-production, which is a big thing. I'm a firm believer in pre-production. Pre-production is where the film is made, where you understand early on the pitfalls, where you see almost every turn in the road. That's not to say there won't be other turns, but at least you get a chance to anticipate and understand where this picture is going to lead you. Once the camera rolls, that picture has a life of its own. Our first indication that things were not going to go as originally planned was at a point in time when I was preparing part of the film, The Battle of Bosworth.
You seek a word of understanding, Richard. The word, perhaps, is truth.
Clarence, let me be.
You will find that truth at Bosworth.
This was very significant, this particular portion of the film, because everything turned at the Battle of Bosworth.
Bosworth. The name Bosworth means nothing to me.
I remember I talked to Eddie. I said, Eddie, I'm going to surprise you with what we're going to be able to do to recreate the Battle of Bosworth on a budget so that we will all understand the importance of this and how it can be done. He seemed very pleased. And just as I had everything in line, he phoned Roger and myself to come down to his office. So we came down to the office to talk. He said, Gene, he said, I don't think you should waste your time on the Battle of Bosworth. And Roger, there are more important things for you to do in the directing of this film. I think what we're going to do with the Battle of Bosworth, it's not that important. You can do it in a montage with stills, voiceover, and a map. Well, you can imagine where Roger and I were at this point. It was as if we didn't hear what he had to say. So Roger and I left the office. We went back to our office and sat there for about an hour thinking, what did we get ourselves into? And I said, well, look, we really have 2 choices. Either we go forward with this film or we can leave the film. So we talked about it for a little bit longer, and he said, let's sleep on it. So the next morning, Roger and I had breakfast, and he said, look, I think we've got to go forward. So we went forward.
The grieving of women grates on my ears, Clarence.
The sets were basically Danny Haller's domain. Danny Haller was certainly one of the most talented art directors that we've ever worked with. And Roger was the one who gave him his first job as an art director. Danny was very talented. He's also a painter. He went on to be a director. He's a great history buff, so the Tower of London was perfect for Danny Haller. And he'd made all the other pictures with Roger, the Vincent Price Poe films.
Mr. Shaw, you may descend.
To make a picture on the budget that we had, you couldn't build every set. You had to borrow sets and revamp sets, cannibalize them, and then you had to put them back in the scene dock. I'm sure they're all borrowed.
Hold your ground, Edward! Hold your ground!
Leo Gordon had a hobby of weaponry.
Perhaps a taste of the rack would be more to the lovely lady's liking. Gelder!
All of the devices that were used in Tower of London were clearly articulated in the script, so that when the prop master got the script, he saw very clearly what was required.
2 more turns and you'll plead to do it. Gelder!
I'm afraid it's too late, my lord. She's dead.
I'm on the set every day. I've never not been on the set every day. And I've worked with some very interesting, very firm filmmakers. I've been always on the set, and I've always been the prime mover in the films that I've made. They've basically been my stories, my material. I think the most interesting story that Vincent, Roger, and I shared was once again when Vincent realized we were not going to recreate the Battle of Bosworth. What we in fact used was stock footage from the original Tower of London from Universal.
Do you hear me? I will live!
We were able to work out an arrangement with Universal, and therefore what you see as the Battle of Bosworth actually is, with superimposition, what was shot with Basil Rathbone. Tower of London was well received. The critics seemed to like the film. It was a successful Vincent Price film. You must remember Roger's ability to make these films in his name with Vincent Price was the paramount selling factor in these films.
All else was in your mind.
Never make a picture in black and white. The Tower of London was as if we were making a silent film when everybody else was using sound.